The woman I paid to take care of me stood 6 feet from my chair with her back half turned and told the new girl on the afternoon shift, "Don't worry about her. She signs whatever you put in front of her. She can't even read her own bank statements anymore." I was holding a cup of tea gone cold in my lap. I did not spill a drop. I did not look up from the window. I had spent 31 years in the United States Army, reconciling ledgers that other people assumed no one would ever check. And I had learned the single most useful skill of my life, standing at a supply desk in 1971. How to let a thief believe you are exactly as stupid as they need you to be. By the time I understood how much she had already taken, the money was gone, the trail was cold, and every paper said I had signed it away myself. So no, this is not the story of how I caught her that afternoon. I didn't. She won. What I want to tell you is what I did in the 6 months after she thought it was over. Stay with me to the end. The part that matters hadn't happened yet. People always assume the will is the dangerous document, the thing read out at the end, when it's too late to argue. But there is always one more page than the people in a hurry bother to turn. One clause, one record, one habit nobody knew you kept. That is the whole reason this channel exists. Subscribe to join our journey. We tell the stories of the ones everyone wrote off too early. If this is your first time here, do me one small favor. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It costs you nothing, and it helps an old woman's story reach the next person who needs to hear it. That's all I'll ask of you. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because you have to know who I was before any of the rest of it makes sense. My name is Margaret Vance. Everyone has called me Peg since I was a girl in Ohio, and most people who meet me now see exactly what they expect to see: a 79-year-old widow in a cardigan, a little slow on the stairs, deaf in the left ear, living alone in a brick house at the quiet end of Halloran Street. What they do not see, because I stopped explaining it long ago, is that I enlisted in 1968. The Army, in its strange wisdom, looked at a farm girl who could do long division in her head and made her a supply clerk, then a finance specialist, and 10 over 31 years and a great deal of stubbornness. A commissioned officer who ran the books for a depot that moved more money in a month than my hometown saw in a decade. I retired a major. My work, stripped to the bone, was this: people steal from large organizations slowly, in amounts they believe are too small to be noticed. It was my job to notice. I kept a folded chamois cloth in the top drawer of my husband Ray's old desk, the kind you use to wipe down a tool, and it still carried the faint smell of machine oil, because Ray was a machinist and some smells outlived the man. When I needed to think clearly, I would take it out and fold it again along the same creases, and the oil would come up off it, and my mind would go quiet and orderly the way it did at the supply desk. Remember that cloth? It matters later. After Ray died, the stairs got harder, and my daughter Sharon, who lives 3 states away and calls on Sundays, decided I needed someone in the house a few days a week. I didn't fight her. A part of me was even glad. That is the first thing I want you to understand. I let them in. I opened the door myself. Her name was Dana. She was 44, with chapped hands and a tired, decent face, and the agency sent her with good references that were, I later learned, entirely real. For the first 2 months, she was wonderful. She remembered I take my tea with no sugar. She learned which step on the porch was loose. She talked to me like a person, which at my age is rarer than you'd think, and I came to look forward to her car in the driveway. I found out later, the way I find out everything, by reading, that Dana had a mother of her own in a memory care facility 2 towns over, and that the facility cost more each month than Dana made, and that the difference was eating her alive. I tell you this not to excuse her. I tell you because she was not a monster. She was a drowning woman who looked around one day and decided the old major in the cardigan was a life raft nobody would miss a few boards from. That is worse than a monster, in a way. A monster you can hate cleanly. The weak link was me, or so she thought, and to be fair, my Sunday calling daughter, who loved me and trusted Dana and was relieved, I think, that someone else was handling it. Sharon signed the agency paperwork. Sharon was glad. Sharon did not read the fine print, and neither, Dana assumed, would I. The first time a number on my monthly statement looked wrong, I said nothing at all. I just took out the chamois cloth and folded it, and I began, very quietly, to count. Here is how it started, and I want to be precise, because the precision is the whole point. In late March, a withdrawal appeared on my checking statement, $212, cash, from the branch downtown. I had not made it, but it was small, and the date fell on a Thursday, which was a Dana day, and Thursdays she did my errands and my banking because the bank tired me out. I had given her a card for exactly that purpose, so a reasonable old woman would assume she'd simply forgotten to mention a cashback at the grocery. I am not a reasonable old woman. I am a finance officer, and a finance officer does not look at one wrong number and conclude theft, because one wrong number is almost always a mistake. What a finance officer does is wait for the second one, because theft has a signature and a mistake does not. A mistake is random. Theft has rhythm. Theft is greedy on a schedule. So I waited. And I did the thing that has saved me more than once in my life. I did nothing visible while I did a great deal in private. I went back through 6 months of statements I'd let pile up in Ray's desk. I am ashamed to say I had let them pile up. Grief makes you sloppy, and sloppiness is what they feed on. I laid them out on the dining table on the days Dana was gone, and I read them the way I used to read Adipo's books, not for the big numbers, which everyone watches, but for the small ones, which no one does. The picture came up slowly, like a photograph in a tray. 200 here, 180 there. A check made out to cash, in a hand that was almost mine, but pressed too hard on the downstroke. And then the one that stopped my breath, not because it was large, but because it was clever. My monthly benefit from the VA, a survivor and service amount that Ray and I had earned with 31 years and 1 bad year in a place I don't talk about, had been quietly redirected. Not stolen outright, rerouted, into an account I didn't recognize by a change of deposit form submitted, the bank would have told you, by me. That was the moment I understood I was not dealing with a woman who took cab fare. I was dealing with a woman who had learned the system. Redirecting a federal benefit takes patience and forged paper and the calm assumption that the victim will never call the agency because the victim is old and the agency is a maze. She was right about the maze. She was wrong about me and mazes. I spent my career inside mazes built by the federal government. They do not frighten me. They feel like home. I said nothing to Dana. I want you to sit with how hard that was. Every Thursday she came in with her tired, decent face and made my tea with no sugar, and I thanked her, and some animal part of me wanted to stand up and scream the truth across the kitchen. But screaming is what they expect from a frightened old woman, and the instant I screamed, she would know I knew, and she would cover her tracks, and I would have nothing but a story no one believes. Panic is the enemy of a clear mind, so I kept my mind clear. I kept folding the cloth. Near the end of that stretch came the afternoon you heard at the very start. Dana, with her back half turned, telling the new girl that I signed whatever was put in front of me, that I couldn't read my own statements anymore. And do you know what I felt, hearing the dismissal said out loud? Not rage, relief. Because a thief who says it out loud has gotten comfortable, and comfortable people make the one mistake you can use. That night, I made a single phone call, not to the police, not to my daughter, to the VA, just to ask one quiet question. What I learned from the answer was so much worse than the theft itself. The question I asked the VA was simple. When was the change of deposit form on my account submitted? And was anything attached to it? The caseworker, a patient young man named Reuben who had no idea he was about to become a small hero in an old woman's story, told me the form had been submitted in February by mail with a copy of a power of attorney attached. A power of attorney. I had never signed one, not for Dana, not for anyone. And there it was, on file with a federal agency, a document granting Dana Riley authority over my financial affairs, notarized, dated, and bearing a signature that the careless eye would call mine. That was the second mistake she made, though she didn't know it yet. Stealing cash is a crime you can muddy. Forging a notarized federal instrument is a crime with a paper spine, and paper spines are what I break for sport. Now, here is where a younger woman, or an angrier one, ruins it. She marches into the bank or calls the sheriff, waving the forgery, and feels righteous for an afternoon. And then the system does what systems do. It asks for proof and slows down and gives the accused time. Dana would say I was confused. She had a real POA on file and a daughter 3 states away who'd told everyone how forgetful Mum had gotten. Against a notarized document and a sympathetic, tired caregiver, the word of a 79-year-old widow is a feather against a brick. I knew exactly how that confrontation ends because I have been the person in the room deciding whose paperwork wins. The paperwork wins, always. So I did not confront her. I started building paperwork of my own. I want to walk you through it because this is the part the angry stories skip, and it is the part that actually works. First, I got my own copy of the forged POA from the VA by written request in my own name, which I was entitled to, and which created a record that I had asked. Second, I opened a new account at a different bank across town, one Dana had no card for and no knowledge of, and I had my social security and a small pension I'd half forgotten rerouted into it, so that whatever else happened, she could not empty me to zero while I worked. Quiet defense before any offense. You secure the perimeter before you ever fire a shot. It was at that second bank that I met the third person who matters in this story, a teller named Alicia, 26 years old, sharp as a tack, who noticed that the old woman opening the account knew the exact federal routing language for a benefit redirect and asked, half joking, if I'd worked in banking. I told her the truth. She got a look on her face I recognized from my own years, the look of someone who likes catching things that are wrong. I did not tell her everything. I told her enough. I asked her if I brought her documents, would she help me make clean copies and date stamp them, and would she be willing, someday, to say in writing that I'd been the one who walked in asking questions while I still had every wit about me. She said yes before I finished the sentence. Never underestimate a young person who hates a cheat. They are the most useful allies on earth, and almost nobody bothers to recruit them. I want to stop here and tell you why I built a witness on purpose, because it is the single thing that separates getting robbed from getting even, and the angry stories never mention it. When it finally comes down to your word against theirs, the question is never who is telling the truth. The question is who can prove what they knew and when they knew it. Dana had a daughter primed to doubt me and a notarized page. I needed something her page could not survive, a disinterested professional with no stake in my family who would testify that on a given date, this old woman walked in clear-eyed and competent and already tracking a fraud. You cannot manufacture that after the fact. You build it before while everyone still thinks you're harmless. Harmless is the best cover there is. I had been harmless on purpose my whole career. Over the next weeks I did, in my dining room, the work of a forensic audit, the way I'd done it in uniform. I built a ledger, a real one, columned, dated, sourced, of every dollar that had left me wrong, going back 8 months. I matched each withdrawal to a Dana day. I photographed the check with the heavy downstroke beside 3 of my genuine signatures so anyone could see the press of the pen was different. I wrote down the name on the account my VA money had been routed to, and this is the part that made my hands go still over the chamois cloth. I recognized it. The account name was a variation of the memory care facility where Dana's mother lived. She wasn't buying handbags. She was paying her dying mother's bills with my survivor benefit. I sat with that for a long time. I am not going to pretend to you that it didn't move me, because it did, and because a story where it didn't would be a lie, and you came here for the true thing. I understood her completely in that moment. I had been a young woman once, with someone I loved going under and not enough money to stop it. If she had knocked on my door and asked, I might have helped her. That is the tragedy of a thief. They will burn down the one house that might have taken them in. But understanding is not the same as permitting. I had earned that benefit in a year of my life I do not describe, and Ray had earned his half of it, and it was not hers to redirect because her grief was louder than mine. So I finished the ledger. And then I did the thing that decided everything that came after. I made 3 identical copies of the whole file: the forged POA, the ledger, the signature comparison, the routing record. Alicia date-stamped each one. I kept one in Ray's desk under the chamois cloth. I mailed one to myself, sealed, and left it sealed, so the postmark would prove the date. And the third I did not use yet. The third was for later. Remember the third copy. Why didn't I strike then, with the file complete? Because of the calendar, and because I am patient in a way only the army and old age can teach you. Sharon was flying in for my birthday in 3 weeks. Dana would be in my kitchen for the party, all tired decency, carrying a cake. And I had learned, long ago, that the time to reveal what you know is never the moment you know it. It is the moment a witness who matters is standing in the room. I did not have a boardroom. I had a birthday. It would do. My birthday fell on a Saturday in June. Sharon flew in Friday night, full of guilt and love, the way grown children are, and Dana arrived Saturday afternoon with a yellow cake and that face, and for a little while my kitchen was warm and full, and I almost let it go. That is the thing no one warns you about. When the trap is built and ready, a part of you would rather keep the peace and eat the cake. Wanting peace is not weakness, but peace bought with your own robbery is just a slower kind of theft, and I had not survived what I survived, to be robbed slowly in my own kitchen. So after the cake, with Sharon at the table and Dana rinsing plates at my sink, I took out the file, not all 3 copies, just the one from under the cloth, and I laid it open on the table, and I said, in the flat, calm voice I learned at the supply desk, Dana, sit down. Sharon, I need you to look at something with me. I will not dress up what happened next into a triumph, because it wasn't one, and I promised you the true thing. Dana did not crumble. Thieves rarely do. The good ones have a second story ready before the first one fails. She looked at the ledger, and her decent, tired face did something complicated, and then she reached, calmly. She had nerve. I'll give her that, for the oldest weapon there is. She turned to my daughter, and she said, gently, the way you'd speak about a child, Sharon, honey, this is what I was afraid of. She gets confused. She's been accusing me of things for weeks. I have a power of attorney because you all asked me to help. It's the only reason any of her bills got paid at all. And I watched my own daughter hesitate. That is the wound inside the wound, and I am going to be honest about it, because honesty is the only thing I have left to give you. For one full second, Sharon looked at the tired, competent caregiver and at her forgetful old mother, and she did not know which of us to believe. A POA on file, a daughter primed for months to expect my decline, a caregiver with a steady voice. The paperwork wins. I told you that. I just hadn't told you it would win this time, against me, at my own table, on my own birthday. Because here is the truth of delayed justice, and it is the truth this channel exists to tell when the other channels lie to you. I did not win that afternoon. Dana walked out of my house with her version intact. Sharon, torn and frightened, agreed that we should all just take a breath and sort the paperwork out calmly, which is what frightened people say, and which gave Dana exactly the time a thief needs. Within a week, the unrecognized account was closed and emptied. The $200 here and there, unrecoverable, the redirected benefit, already spent on a dying woman's care, and try getting a county to claw back money that kept someone's mother in a clean bed. By every measure that pays a bill, Dana won. She took roughly $19,000 from me across 8 months, and she walked away clean. And I want you to feel how that sits, because most of you have felt some version of it, and the stories that pretend it always gets fixed by sundown are lying to you, and they know it. But I told you at the start, the part that mattered hadn't happened yet, and it hadn't, because a forged, notarized federal instrument does not expire when a caregiver empties an account. It sits in a file at the VA with my written request beside it, dated, proving I asked the question before she ran. It sits in a sealed envelope with a postmark. It sits in Alicia's date-stamped copies in 2 banks. And it sits in that third copy, you remembered the third copy, which I did not wave at anyone in a kitchen, where paperwork loses to a steady voice. I mailed the third copy, with a plain typed letter and no anger in it at all, to the one reader in the world for whom a steady voice means nothing and only the paper spine matters, the Office of Inspector General for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Benefit fraud against a veteran, with a forged POA attached. They do not take a breath and sort it out calmly. That is not what they are for. These things are slow. I know that better than anyone. I worked inside the slowness. It took 11 months. I almost didn't live to see it. There was a winter in there I won't pretend was easy, alone in the brick house with a daughter who didn't fully believe me yet. But last spring, 2 investigators with federal credentials sat at the same dining table where Dana told my daughter I was confused, and they had my ledger, columned and sourced the way I was taught in 1971, open in front of them, and they asked me to walk them through it, and I did, in a flat, calm voice, line by line. A forged federal POA is not a county misdemeanor you sort out over cake. It is a federal felony. The benefit money was gone, yes, but Dana is not, as the polite phrase goes, sorting out her paperwork calmly anymore. And my daughter Sharon, who hesitated for 1 second at my table, Sharon flew in for those interviews and sat beside me, and when the investigators left, she put her hand over mine on the chamois cloth and said the only thing I ever needed her to say. I should have read it, Mum. I should have read all of it. I never got the $19,000 back. I want to be clear about that, because the clean stories would give it back to me with interest and a tearful apology, and life does not. What I got back was the record, the one thing they could never forge their way around, because I built it before they knew I was building anything. They wrote me off as an old woman who couldn't read her own statements. I read every line, and the line that mattered, in the end, was the one I wrote myself. If you take one thing from an old major, take this: they do not come for the loud ones. They come for the ones they've decided are already gone. The defense is not anger, and it is not a lawyer you call after the money's gone. It is the quiet, boring habit of keeping your own records better than the people who think you've stopped, before you ever need them. Everything I did to protect myself, the documents that actually matter, how a power of attorney can be used against you and how to lock it down, the plain English bank steps that kept her from emptying me to zero. the exact question to ask a federal agency, and when to ask it. I've put all of it into a short, plain guide I wrote for people exactly my age. It is not legal advice. Talk to a qualified attorney in your state for that. It is the armor I wish someone had handed me before I opened my door. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. If my story put a cold feeling in your chest, that feeling is useful. Use it before you need it. Thank you for staying to the end with me. Tell me in the comments, would you have shown the file at the kitchen table or mailed it quiet like I did? I read them. I read everything. That was always the whole problem, for the people who hoped I'd stopped.